Have you ever been driving home late at night, maybe coming back from a job that drains you, or a social gathering where you felt alone in a crowded room, and you suddenly felt a hollow ache in your chest? It is not quite sadness, and it is not quite anger. It is a quiet, gnawing suspicion that the life you are living does not actually belong to you. You are following the script. You went to school, you took out the loans, you got the job, and you are paying the bills. You are doing everything right by the standards of society, yet you feel like you are slowly disappearing. You are not alone in that feeling. In fact, that specific emotion has a name, and it is much older than you might think. Back in 1852, the English poet Matthew Arnold wrote a piece called The Buried Life. In it, he described the tragedy of how men and women live their entire existence without ever truly expressing who they are or what they want. He wrote about how, in the midst of the world's crowded streets and the din of strife, there rises an unspeakable desire after the knowledge of our buried life. That poem is over 170 years old, but it hits harder today than ever before. We live in an era of infinite noise, where the pressure to perform is broadcast to us 24 hours a day through the black mirrors in our pockets. But what happens when you decide to stop scrolling and start listening to that buried voice? This is exactly what happened to a guy named Ben Nemtin and his 3 best friends. A few years ago, Ben was not a best-selling author or a motivational speaker. He was just a young guy sliding into a deep depression. He had dropped out of university, he felt like he was failing everyone's expectations, and he was surrounded by that grey fog where nothing seems to matter. But then, he stumbled upon Matthew Arnold's poem. That concept of the buried life woke him up. It made Ben and his friends ask a terrifyingly simple question. What do we want to do before we die? They did not just let that be a hypothetical question you ask over a few beers and then forget the next morning. They took it seriously. They sat down and wrote a list of 100 things they wanted to do before they kicked the bucket. It was not just a to-do list. It was a declaration of independence from the mundane. They called their project The Buried Life. They made a pact to go after these dreams, no matter how wild or impossible they seemed. And just to make it interesting, for every item they crossed off their list, they promised to help a stranger achieve one of their dreams too. Then, they bought a beat-up bus, packed their cameras, and hit the road. Now, you might think a list like this would be full of shallow, adrenaline junkie stuff like skydiving or bungee jumping. And sure, there was some of that. But as they traveled, something magical started to happen. The universe seemed to open doors just because they had the audacity to knock. They managed to crash a stranger's wedding and give a toast. They spent the night in a haunted prison. They helped reunite a father and son who had not seen each other in 17 years. The momentum built up to levels that defied logic. In one of the most surreal moments of the entire journey, they actually managed to get into the White House and play a game of basketball with President Barack Obama. Think about the absurdity of that for a second. 4 random guys with a list and a camera, shooting hoops with the leader of the free world, just because they decided to ask. Ben Nemtin eventually turned these adventures into a #1 New York Times best-selling book titled, What Do You Want to Do Before You Die? But the book is not just a travelogue or a brag sheet about cool stunts. It is a manual for unburying yourself. When Ben looks back on that journey, he realized that the specific items on the list, whether it was having a beer with a celebrity or riding a bull, were not the point. The point was the shift in mindset. It was about realizing that the walls we think are trapping us are actually made of paper. We stay in jobs we hate, relationships that have gone cold, and cities that do not inspire us because we are waiting for permission to leave. We are waiting for some external authority to tell us it is okay to chase the thing we actually want. But Ben's story proves that no one is coming to save you. No one is going to hand you a permission slip to live your life. You have to write it yourself. The tragedy is not that life is short. The tragedy is that we often wait until it is nearly over before we actually start participating in it. We treat our dreams like fragile antiques that we keep locked in a cabinet for a special occasion that never comes, while we use the cheap paper plates of our daily routine every single day. As we dive deeper into this concept, I want you to think about your own buried life. What are the things you have pushed down deep because you told yourself they were unrealistic or childish? Maybe you wanted to write a science fiction novel. Maybe you wanted to learn to pilot a plane. Maybe you just wanted to live in a van and wake up next to the ocean for a month. Whatever it is still there, waiting for you to acknowledge it. And as we will see, keeping it buried comes at a much higher cost than you realize. We need to talk about the currency we are all spending every single day, often without checking the balance. Time. It is the ultimate cliché, acknowledging that life is short and that we all eventually return to dust. We nod our heads at this truth, maybe share a philosophical quote on Instagram about carpe diem, and then we immediately go back to scrolling, worrying, and distracted living. We get caught in what I like to call the busy trap. We are exhausted, but we are not necessarily fulfilled. We are moving at 100 miles per hour, but we are just running in circles. Nemtin identifies a massive structural flaw in how we operate. The reason we get things done at work or school is simple: deadlines. Think about it. When you were in college, you turned in that 10-page paper at 11:59 p.m. because you had to. You file your taxes by April 15th because the IRS does not care about your writer's block. You show up to work at 9 a.m. because you need that paycheck to cover the mortgage. These external pressures force us to act. We sacrifice sleep, sanity, and comfort to meet the demands of others. But here is the catch. Your biggest dreams, writing that novel, getting in shape, learning Japanese, fixing the relationship with your father, do not have deadlines. No one is going to fire you if you do not travel to Italy this summer. No one is going to give you an F if you never start that podcast. Because there is no immediate consequence for ignoring your soul, we just keep hitting the snooze button. We tell ourselves seductive lies like, I will do it when things calm down at work, or I will start on Monday, or I am just waiting for the right time. Let me tell you a secret. There is no right time. The stars will never align perfectly. The traffic lights of life will never all be green at the same time. While we wait for someday, the clock is ticking. Research into the psychology of regret paints a stark picture of this procrastination. There is a famous study, often cited in contexts like this, and popularized by palliative care nurse Bronnie Ware, about the regrets of the dying. When people are at the end of the road, looking back on their 90 or so years, they rarely regret the things they did. They do not regret the time they embarrassed themselves asking someone out, or the business venture that failed. They regret the things they didn't do. 76% of people in similar studies cited inaction as their biggest source of anguish. They regretted living the life others expected of them, rather than a life true to themselves. This is the second trap, the script of expectation. In the United States, we are handed a very specific roadmap at birth. Go to college, accrue debt, get a corporate job, buy a house you can barely afford, lease a nice car to impress people at stoplights, and retire at 65. It is the American dream on autopilot. Most of these goals are fine, but they are often fueled by the desire for external validation, the likes, the status, the approval of your parents or society. When you blindly follow this script, you are essentially an extra in the movie of your own life. Ben Nemtin's advice to break this cycle is somewhat radical. He suggests you skip to the end. He wants you to visualize your deathbed. It sounds morbid, but it is actually clarifying. Imagine you are sitting by a window in your final days. What is the one thing that, if left undone, will make you turn your face to the wall and weep? What is the what if that will haunt you? Once you identify that thing, you need to drag it out of the abstract and into the physical world. You need to write it down. This is not just mystical mumbo-jumbo. It is behavioral science. A study led by Dr. Gail Matthews found that you are 42% more likely to achieve your goals just by writing them down. When you put ink to paper, you are signing a contract with yourself. You are making the invisible visible. However, Ben is not suggesting you walk into your boss's office tomorrow, flip a table, and quit to become a traveling minstrel. That is reckless. The buried life philosophy is about integration, not destruction. You do not have to blow up your life to change it. You just have to carve out space. Think about the concept of moonlighting for your own soul. You have your 9 to 5 to pay the bills, but what are you doing with your 5 to 9? If you want to be a writer, you do not need a cabin in the woods. You need 1 hour a night after the kids go to sleep. If you want to run a marathon, you do not need to be a pro athlete. You need to wake up 30 minutes earlier. If you want to be a chef, use your weekends to take classes or experiment in your kitchen. It is about the aggregation of marginal gains. If you improve or work toward your goal by just 1% every day, the compound interest over a year is astronomical. You do not need a massive leap of faith. You need consistent, small steps taken with intention. You need to stop waiting for permission and start manufacturing your own momentum. Because if you do not assign a deadline to your dreams, the universe will assign one for you, and by then it will be too late to do anything about it. There is a specific kind of clarity that comes from looking at the numbers, and sometimes the math of life is terrifying. To bring this point home, Ben Nemtin points to the work of Tim Urban, the brilliant mind behind the blog, Wait, But Why. You might know Tim from his viral TED talk on the instant gratification monkey inside the mind of a procrastinator. He is one of the few people on the planet who can make you laugh while simultaneously inducing a full-blown existential crisis. Tim is not just a blogger. He is a deep thinker, admired by visionaries like Elon Musk, and he created a visual tool that changes everything: the life calendar. Imagine your life not as a vague timeline, but as a series of empty boxes on a single sheet of paper. Each box represents 1 week of your life. If you are lucky enough to live to 90, you get a grid of specifically 4,680 boxes. That is it. That is the entire inventory of your time on Earth. When you look at this grid, if you are, say, 30 years old, you realize that the first third of the page is already filled in. Those boxes are gone. You cannot get a refund on them. But the real gut punch comes when you stop counting years and start counting events. This is a concept Tim calls the tail end. Let's apply this to the people you love. This is the part that hurts, but it is a necessary pain. Think about your parents. When you were a kid, you saw them every single day. You probably saw them so much that they annoyed you. But then the American script took over. You turned 18, you graduated high school, and you moved away for college or a job in a different city. Now, maybe you are a busy professional. You visit home for Thanksgiving, maybe a few days around Christmas, and perhaps one random weekend in the summer. Let's say, on average, You see your parents 5 times a year. If your parents are currently 60 years old and they live to be 90, you might think, oh, I have 30 years left with them. That is plenty of time. But the math tells a different story. 30 years multiplied by 5 visits a year is 150 visits. That is it. You do not have 30 years. You have 150 instances. If you visualize that as a pile of coins, you are spending one every time you say goodbye at the airport. Tim Urban calculated that by the time you graduate high school, you have likely already used up 93% of the total in-person time you will ever have with your parents. You are currently living in the final 7%. You are in the tail end. You can apply this same relentless math to everything you enjoy. How many more times will you swim in the ocean? How many more books will you actually read? If you read 5 books a year and you have 50 years left, that is 250 books. You cannot read everything. You have to choose. This perspective is not meant to depress you. It is meant to shock you into presence. It forces you to treat every Thanksgiving dinner, every phone call, and every coffee with a friend as a precious, non-renewable resource. It strips away the pettiness of grudges and the distraction of social media. When you realize you only have a handful of Saturdays left with your best friend, you stop scrolling on your phone and you start listening. This leads us to the final, and perhaps most powerful, lesson from Ben's journey. You must practice thinking about death. In Western culture, we hide death. We sanitize it, keep it in hospitals, and pretend it is not going to happen to us. But the Stoics and the great philosophers knew better. They practiced Memento Mori, remember that you will die. Thinking about your own mortality is the ultimate tool to declutter your life. It is the filter that separates the signal from the noise. When you are standing at the end of your life looking back, do you think you will care about what your neighbors thought of your car? Do you think you will care about the awkward silence in a presentation you gave 5 years ago? Will you care about the fear of rejection that stopped you from asking for what you wanted? No. The fear of embarrassment, the fear of failure, the pressure to conform, all of that falls away in the face of death. What remains is what is truly important. You will care about the love you gave, the experiences you collected, and the times you were brave enough to be yourself. So here is the challenge. It is uncomfortable, but I want you to sit with it. Imagine you are at your own funeral. Who is there? What are they saying about you? But more importantly, what are you saying to yourself? If that version of you, the one who has run out of boxes on the calendar, could travel back in time to talk to you right now, what would they say? Would they tell you to work more overtime? Would they tell you to worry more about the opinions of strangers on the internet? Or would they grab you by the shoulders and beg you to wake up? You do not need to quit your job tomorrow to start living. You just need to stop sleepwalking. Write down the things that set your soul on fire. Put a deadline on them. Treat your dreams with the same respect you treat a project at work. Book the ticket. Write the first chapter. Make the apology. Forgive the enemy. Tell the person you love that you love them. Because the harsh truth is, we are all just walking each other home. The boxes are being checked off whether you are paying attention or not. The difference between a life of regret and a life of fulfillment is simply the decision to grab the pen and write your own story before the paper runs out. So, I will leave you with the question that started it all, the question that pulled Ben out of the darkness and into the light. And I want you to answer it honestly, not for me, not for the comments section, but for yourself in the quiet of tonight. What do you want to do before you die?